Elara was a widow. That was the first and last thing most people in Prosperity Flats knew about her. She lived on the far edge of the settlement, on the parcel of land her husband, Elias, had bought a decade before. It was not good land. It was rocky and sloped, and the soil was thin, better for scrub pine than for wheat. Her possessions were few: a sway-backed barn that leaned into the prevailing west wind, a small, tidy cabin that was more patch than original timber, one horse, a grey gelding named Shale, with patient eyes and scarred knees. And the journals. Elias had left her the journals. He had been a quiet man, a surveyor by trade, but a geologist by soul. He saw the world in layers of rock and time. He saw the long, slow history of the land in the bend of a river and the deep cracks in a granite outcrop. He wrote everything down in leather-bound books, his handwriting a neat, precise script that filled a dozen volumes. He had written of fire. He had studied the ancient burn scars on the oldest trees, the layers of charcoal buried deep in the soil. He had calculated the cycles. He believed the land was not meant for the town they had built. Prosperity Flats was a town of pine and pride, built in a bowl of dry timber that was, in his words, a kiln waiting for a match. Before the lung fever took him, he had drawn the plans. The plans were not for a new house or a bigger barn. They were for a hole in the ground, a cellar. But not the sort of damp, shallow pit the townsfolk used for storing potatoes. Elias's design was an act of engineering. He called it the earth hold. It was to be a sanctuary dug into the granite shelf that ran beneath their property, a place immune to the ravages of the surface world. After a year of mourning, Elara sold her husband's surveying tools. She kept his pickaxe, his shovel, and his wheelbarrow. On the first day of May, in the year 1887, she began to dig. She did not dig in the open. The plan specified the work begin inside the old barn, in the corner where the floor was already packed earth. She broke the ground there, her movements methodical, driven by a grief that had cooled into sheer, unyielding purpose. The work was brutal. The first few feet were soil and clay, but then she hit stone. Not boulders, but a solid shelf of granite, the bones of the earth. For this, Elias had designed a system of fire and water. She would build a great bonfire over a section of the rock, heating it until it was nearly white. Then, from a safe distance, she would douse it with cold water from the well. The thermal shock would crack the stone, splitting it into manageable pieces she could pry out with a crowbar. It was slow, grueling labor. Each day she descended into the growing darkness, her world shrinking to the circle of her lantern light, the ring of steel on stone, the rasp of her own breathing. After 6 months, the town began to notice, or rather, they began to notice the growing mountain of dirt and shattered rock piling up behind her barn. It was Mayor Thompson who came to investigate. He was a man whose ambition had outpaced his wisdom, a man who believed progress was measured in the height of a steeple and the width of a boardwalk. He found Elara at the lip of the pit, hauling up a bucket of stone fragments with a simple rope and pulley. "Mistress Elara," he had said, peering into the gloom, "what is the meaning of this excavation? Are you digging a new well?" Elara paused, her hands raw on the rope. She considered the truth, the detailed plans in the journals, the cycles of fire, the coming catastrophe. She knew what he would hear. Madness. "I am building a cellar," she said simply. "A place for storage." The mayor snorted, a small, dismissive sound. "A cellar of this magnitude? For what? You barely farm enough to fill a pantry." He gestured at the immense pile of rock. This is folly. A waste of a woman's time. You should be thinking of remarrying, of finding a man to work this land properly. Elara did not reply. She simply tipped her bucket, let the stones clatter onto the pile, and lowered it back into the darkness. The mayor's dismissal was the first stone in a wall of mockery that would soon surround her. The story of the widow's folly spread through Prosperity Flats like a weed. It became a source of amusement, a break from the monotony of frontier life. People would ride out on a Sunday just to look at the growing pile of earth behind her barn, shaking their heads and chuckling. Dr. Finch was the town's voice of science. He was a man educated back east, proud of his modern knowledge and contemptuous of what he called folk nonsense. He pronounced Elara's project a public health menace. To live underground is to invite infirmity, he declared at the general store, his voice projecting for all to hear. The dampness seeps into the lungs. The darkness breeds melancholy and madness. She is not building a cellar. She is digging her own grave. The phrase stuck. It became her name. The Ice Widow, digging her own grave. The most vocal critic was Jedediah Magnuson. He was the wealthiest man in the county, a rancher whose herds covered 3 hillsides. He was a man who believed in visibility, in monuments to his own success. As Elara dug down, he was building up. On the highest point of his land, overlooking the entire valley, Magnuson was constructing a new manor. It was a testament to timber. A sprawling 2-story house with a wide veranda, intricate gingerbread trim, and a roof of expensive cedar shingles. He boasted it was the finest home west of the capital. While that mad woman burrows like a mole, I build for the sky, Magnuson would say, gesturing to his creation. My house will stand for 100 years, a beacon of prosperity. It is built with modern techniques, proper framing and lightning rods. It is a fortress of civilization. What is she building? A tomb. The name evolved. Her project was no longer just her grave. It was Elara's Coffin. The name was cruel, and it was catchy. It became a joke, then a local idiom. A foolish or doomed enterprise was digging Elara's coffin. A child who refused to come in from the cold was told to stop digging his coffin. Elara heard the whispers. She saw the pointed fingers when she went to town for supplies. She endured the condescending smiles and the feigned concern. It did not stop her. The mockery was just noise, a surface disturbance. Deep in the earth, there was only the work. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the catastrophe arrives. The work was her entire world. The sun rose and she descended. The sun set and she emerged, covered in dust and grime, her muscles aching with a deep, satisfying pain. Shale, her horse, was her silent partner. He hauled the heavy sleds of rock away from the barn. He stood patiently for hours, his presence a warm, living comfort in the solitary landscape. She would talk to him as she worked, her voice a low murmur, telling him of the plans, of Elias's words, of the slow, steady progress. By the spring of 1888, the main chamber was complete. It was a space 50 feet long and 20 feet wide, with a high, arched ceiling of solid granite. The air was cool and still, smelling of damp earth and stone. It was not a cellar. It was a cathedral of silence. But the work was not done. This was merely the first phase. Following Elias's journals to the letter, she began the technical work. She chiseled channels in the floor, sloping them gently toward a deep pit in the corner that would become the cistern. She spent a month lining the cistern with a thick layer of blue clay she dug from the creek bed, pounding it with a wooden mallet until it was as smooth and impermeable as pottery. Next were the vents. This was the most ingenious part of the design. Elias understood that a sealed space was a death trap. It needed to breathe. He had designed 2 shafts. The intake shaft was a long, narrow tunnel that sloped upward for 100 yards, its opening hidden beneath a jumble of field stones in the cool, shaded hollow by the creek. The air drawn through it would be naturally cooled and filtered by the earth. The exhaust shaft went straight up, through the roof of the barn, disguised as a simple stone chimney for a forge that did not exist. The physics were precise. The temperature differential would create a constant, slow-moving current of fresh air. It was a passive system, requiring no bellows, no power, only the laws of nature. She mortared the walls not with cement, but with a mixture of clay, sand, and horsehair, a technique from one of Elias's oldest books. It was pliable, yet incredibly strong. She built partitions, creating smaller chambers for storage, a sleeping area, and a large, secure room at the back. This last room was for shale. A ramp, wide and gently sloped, led from the main barn floor down into this subterranean stable. It had its own ventilation and a connection to the cistern. In a fire, she would not leave him behind. The final piece was the door. Not the door to the barn, but the door to the earth hold itself. It was set at the bottom of the entrance ramp, deep within the earth. She built it from 3 layers of thick oak, soaked in alum and brine to resist fire. She faced it with a sheet of hammered iron she bought from a traveling blacksmith. It was hung on massive iron hinges set deep into the granite frame. When closed, it sealed with the finality of a bank vault. She worked through the summer, the fall, and the winter. She stocked the storerooms, jars of dried apples, smoked meats, pickled vegetables, sacks of beans and flour, barrels of clean water drawn from the well before she sealed the system, kerosene for her lamps, blankets, candles, and a small box of Elias's books. By the summer of 1889, it was finished. 2 years of her life, buried in the earth. From the outside, nothing had changed but the size of the rock pile. The barn still leaned, the cabin still looked weathered, but beneath it, the sanctuary was ready. It was a secret kingdom of stone and silence. And the land was growing thirsty. If you're enjoying this story, hit that hype button right now. It's free, takes a second, and helps this video reach more people. The summer of 1889 was not just dry. It was a season of subtraction. The creek behind Elara's property shrank from a stream to a trickle, then to a series of stagnant pools. The grass in the meadows cured early, turning from green to a brittle, pale gold by the end of June. The soil in the town gardens turned to dust that puffed up with every footstep. Elara saw the signs. Elias had taught her to read the language of a landscape in distress. She watched the animals. The squirrels, usually territorial and scattered, were gathering in frantic, chittering masses along the dwindling creek bed. Deer, usually timid and nocturnal, were seen wandering in broad daylight, their movements nervous and erratic, their noses to the wind. The birds seemed to have vanished altogether. The usual evening chorus of whippoorwills and owls was replaced by a profound, unsettling silence. She observed the trees. The scrub pines on her land were weeping resin, great thick tears of amber that hardened on their bark. Elias had written that this was a tree's last defense, sealing its wounds against a coming trial by fire. The leaves on the deciduous trees curled inward, a silver-grey colour, as if they had given up on life long before autumn. There was a change in the air itself, a a strange lack of humidity that made the skin feel tight and the eyes itch. A faint metallic scent on the wind, the smell of parched earth and ozone. The sky was a bleached, hazy blue, the sun a white-hot disk that offered light but no warmth of spirit. The barometric pressure, measured on Elias's old brass instrument, had been falling steadily for a month, a slow, inexorable plunge. The town of Prosperity Flats remained oblivious. They complained about the heat, they grumbled about the dust, but their faith in their own permanence was unshakable. They had built a town. They had wells. They had a volunteer fire brigade with a shiny red hand pumper. They believed these things made them masters of their environment. They saw a drought. Elara saw a fuse being lit. In the last week of August, she made her final preparations. She topped off the cistern, bucket by laborious bucket. She moved the last of her supplies from the cabin to the earth hold. A small chest of medical supplies, her sewing kit, a whetstone for her axe. She checked the seals on the great oak door, oiling the hinges one last time. She led Shale down the ramp into his subterranean stall. He went willingly, his trust in her absolute. He settled into the cool darkness as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She stood at the entrance to the earth hold, looking back at the sun-baked world. A thought flickered through her mind. She should warn them. She should ride into town and scream at them, tell them what was coming, force them to listen. The memory of their faces stopped her. The mayor's condescending smile. Dr. Finch's smug pronouncements. Jedediah Magnuson's booming laughter. The smirks and whispers of the townspeople. They would not hear a warning. They would hear the ravings of the mad widow. They would say she was trying to scare them, that she wanted them to join her in her coffin. Her warning would not save them. It would only give them one last chance to mock her before the end. Her duty was not to them. Her duty was to the wisdom Elias had left her. She closed the heavy door from the inside, the sound a deep, resonant boom that echoed in the stone chamber. She slid the massive iron bolt into place. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the quiet, steady glow of her lantern and the gentle sound of Shale shifting his weight in the next chamber. On September 5th, 1889, a storm broke in the western mountains. But it was a dry storm, a thing of violent wind and crackling electricity, with no rain to offer relief. A single bolt of lightning, forked and vicious, struck a dead pine tree on a high ridge. It smouldered for an hour. Then the wind shifted. It came from the west, a hot, dry gale that had travelled over 1,000 miles of parched plains. It breathed life into the ember, and the ember became a flame. The flame became a fire. The fire became a monster. It did not creep or crawl. It exploded. It raced through the canopy of the dry forest, a crown fire of unimaginable heat and speed. It moved faster than a galloping horse, roaring with a voice that was not a sound, but a physical blow, a pressure wave that shook the very ground. The town of Prosperity Flats saw it first as a plume of smoke on the horizon. Mayor Thompson assured everyone it was miles away, that the fire brigade would handle it. An hour later, the sky had turned a bruised, sickly orange. Ash began to fall, fine and grey as snow. Then came the animals. A terrified, stampeding wave of deer, rabbits, and coyotes fled through the town, their primal fear ignoring the presence of humans. Panic finally took hold. The fire was no longer on the horizon. It was here. It was a moving wall of red and black, 100 feet high, consuming everything in its path. The sound was a deafening, continuous thunder. The failure of the conventional was swift and absolute. The volunteer fire brigade connected their pumper to the town well, but the well ran dry in 20 minutes. They moved to the next, and the next. The water table, already low from the drought, was no match for the inferno. The proud, modern buildings were tinderboxes. The paint on their facades blistered and peeled, and then the wood beneath ignited. The tar paper roofs caught fire from the rain of embers. Windows shattered from the intense heat, allowing the fire to surge inside. Jedediah Magnuson's grand manor, his fortress on the hill, became his funeral pyre. Its high position, designed to catch the breeze, now caught the full, focused blast of the firestorm. The elegant verandas and cedar shingles went up in a single, explosive whoosh of flame. The lightning rods stood useless against a foe that came from below. The house burned so brightly it was like a second, malevolent sun. Deep underground, Elara felt nothing but a faint vibration in the stone beneath her. The roar of the firestorm was a distant, muffled hum, like the sound of a far-off waterfall. The air in the earthhold remained cool and fresh, drawn from the shaded creek bed the fire had already passed over. She sat on a simple wooden stool, mending a tear in one of Shale's blankets. The lantern cast a steady, golden light. She had lit a single candle, its flame unwavering in the still air. She was calm. She was safe. She was prepared. Her world had been reduced to this stone sanctuary, and in that reduction, she had found a perfect, unassailable peace. The coffin had become an ark. If the storyteller has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Hit that hype button if you haven't already. The fire passed as quickly as it had come. It was a storm, not a flood. It raged for 3 hours, and then, having consumed all available fuel, it moved on, a red glow receding to the east. It left behind a new world, a world of black and grey. The ground was a carpet of hot ash. The trees were blackened, skeletal fingers clawing at a sky thick with smoke. The town of Prosperity Flats was gone. What remained was smouldering foundations, twisted metal, and the brick chimneys of the more substantial buildings, standing like tombstones in a vast, ruined cemetery. The survivors emerged from root cellars, from the river, from any shallow ditch they had managed to find. They were dazed, choking, their faces streaked with soot and tears. Their world had been erased. Dr. Finch had survived by submerging himself in a horse trough. He stumbled through the ruins, his fine suit ruined, his lungs burning. He was a man of science, but the event had been biblical, a force beyond comprehension. He walked aimlessly, his medical knowledge useless against this scale of devastation. His path took him toward the edge of town, toward the old widow's property. He saw the familiar, leaning barn and expected to find it gone. But it was still standing. Charred, yes, its western wall scorched black, but standing. And from a stone chimney he had never noticed before, a thin, clean plume of smoke rose into the hazy sky. Curiosity, a last flicker of his rational mind, drew him closer. He saw the great pile of rock, now dusted with ash. He saw the wide, sloping entrance leading down into the earth beside the barn. And he saw the door, a massive thing of wood and iron, untouched by the flames. He hammered on it with his fist, his voice a raw croak. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" There was a sound from within. The scraping of a heavy bolt, the groan of immense hinges. The door swung inward, revealing a cavern of cool, clean air and steady lantern light. Elara stood there. She was clean. Her clothes were unmarked, Her face was calm. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a quiet, weary acceptance. Dr. Finch stared at her, then at the vast, peaceful space behind her. He saw the neat stacks of supplies, the barrels of water, the soft glow of other lanterns. He smelled clean air. He felt a coolness on his scorched skin. He fell to his knees. He did not have the words. He could only cough, a racking, painful sound in the sudden silence. Elara looked down at the man who had mocked her, who had called her work a grave. She felt no triumph, no desire for vengeance. There was no room for such things now. She stepped aside, gestured to the interior, and spoke the first words. "There is water inside. Come in." He was the first. He was not the last. Word spread among the survivors with the speed of desperation. There was a place. The widow's place. The coffin. It had survived. They came in a slow, stumbling procession of the humbled. The store owner and his family. The blacksmith who stared in professional awe at the hinges on her door. Mothers clutching, crying, soot-covered children. They came with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the horror in their eyes. Elara took them all in. She had planned for one, but the space was vast. She organized them, her voice calm and steady, a beacon in their shock. She designated one chamber for the injured, another for families with small children. She rationed the water, giving a cup to each person. She brought out her stores of dried fruit and hard biscuits. She became their leader. Not by election, but by the simple, undeniable fact of her foresight. Her quiet competence was the only authority left in a world turned to ash. The last to arrive were Mayor Thompson and Jedediah Magnuson. The rancher was badly burned, his arm and face a ruin of blistered skin. The mayor supported him, his own face a mask of profound, soul-deep shame. They stood at the entrance, two kings of a vanished kingdom, now beggars at her door. Mayor Thompson looked at Elara, at the nearly 100 people she had taken into her shelter, at the quiet order she had created from chaos. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He could only look at the ground. It was Magnuson who spoke, his voice a pained whisper. We saw the smoke from your chimney. We thought. "I am boiling water for bandages," Elara said, her tone flat, without accusation. She looked at his burns, her expression shifting to one of clinical assessment. "Dr. Finch is inside. He will need help. Bring him in." She turned and walked back into the lantern light, leaving them to follow. In the safety of the earth-hold, the old hierarchies were meaningless. There was no mayor, no rancher, no doctor, no widow. There were only the survivors, and the one who had saved them. A week later, when the smoke had cleared enough for relief wagons to arrive from the capital, the people of Prosperity Flats held a meeting. They did not have a town hall, so they gathered in the open, in the center of the ruins, sitting on charred timbers and overturned wagons. Elara stood to one side, alone as always. Mayor Thompson, his face still smudged with soot, stood before the assembly. He was not the same man. The pride was gone, burned out of him. He looked at Elara, and for the first time, he truly saw her. "We have lost everything," he began, his voice hoarse. "Our homes, our businesses, our church, everything we built. We built with wood and with pride, and it all burned." He paused, gathering himself. "But we are not all lost. Nearly 100 of us are alive today for one reason and one reason only. Because one of us did not build with wood. One of us did not build with pride. She built with stone and with wisdom. He turned to face Elara directly. Dr. Finch and a heavily bandaged Jedediah Magnuson came to stand beside him. "We called her a fool," the mayor said, his voice breaking. "We laughed at her. We gave her work a cruel name. We called it Elara's Coffin." He took a step toward her. "It was not a coffin. It was our ark. Elara, we stand here today, before our neighbors and before God, to say that you were right, and we were wrong. We were arrogant fools, and we are sorry." Dr. Finch stepped forward. "My science was blind. I saw only dampness and darkness. I did not see the truth of this land. Your husband's knowledge and your labor, they were a truer science than any I have ever known." Magnuson, leaning on a crutch, spoke last. "I built for the sky, and my monument became a torch. You built for the earth, and your sanctuary became a salvation. I beg your forgiveness." The town was silent, watching her. They waited for her response, for absolution or for condemnation. Elara looked at the three men, at the faces of the people she had sheltered. She felt a great weariness, the weight of 2 years of solitary labor and a lifetime of being misunderstood. "There is nothing to forgive," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the still air. "What happened was not about me or you. It was about the land. My husband understood it. He knew it demands respect. It gives life, but it can also take it away. Pride is a poor shield against it." She looked around at the ruins. "Survival is not about pride. It is about preparation. It is about listening. If you wish to rebuild here, you must learn to listen to the earth. I will teach you what he taught me." Her acceptance was not warm. It was not forgiveness in the way a preacher might speak of it. It was practical. It was solid. It was like the stone of the earth-hold itself. It was an offer not of comfort, but of a future. The town of Prosperity Flats was rebuilt, but it was reborn. The new houses were built low to the ground, with foundations of fieldstone and thick earthen walls. Every home had a deep, well-ventilated fire cellar. They planted fire breaks of green, hardy trees. They constructed a town-wide cistern system based on Elara's design. The phrase, "digging Elara's coffin," was never spoken again. In its place, a new saying arose. When a person showed great foresight, when they prepared diligently for a future no one else could see, people would nod and say, "He is building Elara's way." It was the highest compliment a person could receive. Elara lived for another 35 years. She never remarried. She never moved into the new town centre. She stayed in her small cabin, which she rebuilt with stone, and in her earth-hold, which remained the heart of her homestead. She did not fully rejoin their society, but she became its soul. She was their teacher. The children of the town came to her not for lessons in reading or arithmetic, but for lessons in living. She taught them how to read the sky, how to understand the language of the trees, how to build with their hands, how to respect the power of the natural world. She never spoke of the fire or of the mockery she had endured. She spoke only of the work, of the plans, of the wisdom that was there for anyone willing to look down at the earth instead of up at their own vanity. She died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78 on a cool autumn morning. The entire town, 3 generations of people who owed her their lives, followed her casket to a small plot on the hill. They did not mark her grave with an ornate stone. Instead, they went to the entrance of the earth-hold, the place that had been their salvation. There, the son of the blacksmith, now a master craftsman himself, chiseled an inscription into the granite lintel above the great oak door. The words were simple, chosen by a committee of the town elders, the children she had saved so long ago. The inscription read, "She listened to the earth when we listened only to our pride. September 5th, 1889.